Just 2 weeks ago, Russia was denying to the world it had any intention of waging war or launching an invasion. This is what that denial looks like now. As the fighting goes on, there's little sign of progress in peace talks and the growing belief that worse is to come. Has NATO accepted that Ukraine will fall, or could it still see a moral imperative to intervene directly in combat?
We cannot answer this by going to war with him. Not now, not at this point.
My guest this week from Washington is Constance Stelzenmüller, a foreign and security expert at the Brookings Institution and a specialist on Germany and transatlantic relations. And what of Europe? Germany has reversed decades of policy with weapons shipments direct to Ukraine and serious money for its cash-starved armed forces. But is it too late to help Ukraine?
A no-fly zone would be a direct entry of NATO into combat.
What about NATO efforts to find President Putin an exit ramp from the war he started? How might that look? And can Russia and the West ever go back to business as usual? All that and more on Conflict Zone. Constance Stelzenmüller, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
Last month you said there were many ways this war could become extremely complex and implicate NATO directly. How long can NATO's combat forces stay out of this conflict?
Well, the point I was trying to make at the time was that the distinctions between, if a country that's being attacked is a member of NATO and therefore Article 5, the membership mutual security guarantee obtains, and not being a member, so that guarantee does not obtain, is academic in conflicts like these. It's academic because we are supporting Ukraine by giving it weapons, because we are massively sanctioning the aggressor, Russia, and because we are trying to alleviate a huge humanitarian crisis on the territory of Ukraine with the help of what might become humanitarian convoys that need to be protected and so on. That all brings us very close to the brink of a potential engagement with Russia, which we are strenuously currently trying to avoid. But ultimately, to be honest, the not just escalation dominance, but the choice of whether to engage us is Russia's. Putin has several times said that the West is, in his eyes, a combatant because of the financial and export controls, the financial sanctions and export controls, because of weapons deliveries. And it's anybody's guess on whether he makes good on that threat. And remember, he has reinforced that threat by suggesting that he might use tactical nuclear weapons.
But my point is this: civilian casualties have been mounting significantly in the last few days. If that continues, might that not be the trigger for direct intervention? You talk to US policymakers and advisors. Do you believe there's a line in Ukraine that NATO will not allow Russian troops to cross?
Well, I think you and I were around for the Yugoslav wars, Afghanistan, and other cases, and we know that NATO often says there is a line, it will itself not cross, and then it ends up crossing it. And we also know that in cases of full-scale humanitarian disasters and war crimes, where there is an aggressor, a predator like Russia, indiscriminately shelling civilian housing, indiscriminately attacking civilians, that creates a degree of completely justified outrage among Western civil societies that then is very hard to resist.
You called it righteous responsibility, I think you said, didn't you, when you were talking about the Western interventions in the Balkans back in the 90s?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it is entirely possible that if, for example, as the Russians are now demanding the Ukrainians evacuate their major cities, put citizens of major Ukrainian cities on buses and ferry them out, and the Russians have suggested they be ferried to Russia and Belarus. If the Russians, for example, continued shelling those cities, if the Russians shell those buses, we've seen an attempted evacuation of the southern port city of Mariupol, where the Russians then tried to shell, or did shell, in fact, the evacuation lines. That will all increase public pressure. But right now, the West is resisting that for the simple reason that back in the day, 30 years ago, in the Yugoslav wars, we were dealing with Serbia as an aggressor. Serbia did not have nuclear weapons. It was not a great power. It was a medium power with conventional weaponry that was bad enough and vicious militias. But now we are dealing with a great power with nuclear weapons, and nobody wants what I think could, arguably be seen as the beginning of World War III.
You say nobody wants that. President Zelensky says NATO's decisions have given the green light for further bombing of Ukrainian towns and villages. All the people who die, he said, from this day forward will also die because of your weakness, because of your lack of unity, your being NATO. How's that accusation going down in Western capitals?
I think that's being read as the understandable hyperbole of an admirable leader under extraordinary pressure. Again, the legal case for NATO's going to war against Russia over Ukraine is by no means clear cut, and the military strategic case is also by no means clear cut. I think the reluctance by Western governments to contemplate this is entirely understandable, and it is not true, as you know full well yourself, Tim Sebastian. It is not the case that we're not doing anything. The Ukraine is receiving the biggest influx of weapons ever received by a country that is being attacked from Western countries. Even the Germans are now ferrying in extraordinary amounts of lethal weaponry.
But is it enough?
The EU,
is it enough? I mean, there may be good reasons, as you say, for NATO's stance, but the charge of appeasement, which has been leveled at NATO by the government, and not just by the Ukrainian government, not just in hyperbole. Putin threatens, the West backs off, doesn't it? That's a dangerous precedent.
No, I'm sorry, that's just not correct. This is not appeasement. We have enacted the fiercest financial sanctions ever enacted by the West. The Russian central bank's assets have been frozen. Export controls have been instituted. That will severely, perhaps not deter Putin, and I'll come to what could deter him in a second. That may not deter him, but it will severely constrain his freedom of action. And I think that it may very well, in very short order, begin to change the cost-benefit analysis of his closest inner circle, his enablers, his helpers. That's not the oligarchs. I'm talking about the hard men, the Siloviki, who are his band of brothers, as it were. Ultimately, if you look at what Putin has been saying, what he wrote in this essay about Ukraine in the summer, what he's been saying ever since, his press conferences every day, this is a man who believes he is on a mission not just to subjugate, pound Ukraine into submission and bring it, Belarus and presumably the Caucasus, back into Russia's sphere of influence, but also to roll back the democratization of Eastern Europe, to neutralize Western Europe and throw the Americans out of the continent. Now that is a maximalist goal that we must all withstand, that we are withstanding. And the best way to help Ukraine, frankly now, is to receive every single Ukrainian who wants to leave, as we are doing. The EU has reacted with extraordinary speed and generosity to receive people who are leaving, and they're being given. They don't have to comply with any formalities and can stay for 3 years. That is taking the pressure off Ukraine. But ultimately, I think it would require a dire change of circumstances for NATO to contemplate direct war with Russia. Ultimately, in my view, Tim, the only thing that can change Putin here and can change Putin's own cost-benefit analysis is his inner circle. Nobody else can and will, is my firm belief.
He has, up till now, raised the spectre of nuclear war. If you like, he's waved nuclear weapons in our face. Isn't the problem that if mutually assured destruction can no longer keep the world safe, then the West's entire military doctrine, post-World War II, is starting to look pretty inadequate, isn't it? If he doesn't recognize mutually assured destruction, we're in uncharted waters, aren't we?
Indeed. But I think we've been in uncharted waters since the Kremlin sent these two quote-unquote draft treaties just before Christmas to the US and to NATO, which, as I was saying earlier, contain maximalist demands that all of them were non-starters, that ignored the offers of dialogue made by the West, which were constructive, real, and generous, and where it became clear that Putin is on a personal mission to perhaps consolidate his legacy as a historical great ruler of Russia, and that this might be something where ultimately, all efforts of deterrence and defense by the West would fail. But we cannot answer this by going to war with him. Not now, not at this point. It may happen in the future, particularly if Putin makes good on his threat to consider NATO member states or all of NATO combatants and attacks NATO territory. In that case, all bets are off.
You talked about the change of heart in Germany, the way in which the war, if you like, has caused an earthquake in German foreign policy and political thinking. Berlin did a sudden about turn in sending military aid to Ukraine, pumping huge injections of cash into the defense budget. Do you believe in sudden political conversions like this? Do you think it'll hold?
It's not a sudden political conversion, and I do believe it will hold. Here's why. I think that this was preceded by a number of other events in Germany, but this isn't the occasion for a history class, so I will forgo that. But say the following: unlike the historical shift in 1998 and 99, when a center-left German government headed by one Gerhard Schröder decided to participate in NATO's air war, an air war against Serbia over the depredations by Serbian militias in Kosovo, which ended with a NATO division heading into Kosovo, led by a German general, mind you. And unlike the 2014 Munich moment when the German president, the foreign minister, and the defense minister stood at the Munich Security Conference and said, we must take on a responsibility in the world commensurate with our power. Unlike those moments, this is a German chancellor making promises that are quantifiable benchmarks for which all three of his coalition parties had to sacrifice some of their sacred cows.
But my question is, can he keep those promises? Just hours after Russia invaded Ukraine, the head of the German army, General Alfons Mais, voiced his intense frustration with his government, saying everyone knew this was coming, but the German army was standing there more or less empty-handed.
Can I just say, as a student of German military capabilities for a long time, that General Mais was indulging in a tiny bit of hyperbole. It is a trope of European discussions, particularly in Great Britain, that the German army is completely incapable. That's not quite true. It is not as capable as it should be, granted, given the amount of money that we're spending on it. And yes, much needs to be done to refurbish it, absolutely. But look, Germany is maybe in military terms a middle power or less. We are a great power economically. And we are throwing everything we've got at these financial sanctions and export controls, which come with real costs to us, Germany. And the German chancellor has said that we stand behind them. We are throwing 100 billion euros as a startup investment into German defense.
Which will take time to filter through. It'll take time to filter through. The results aren't going to be immediate, are they?
Yes, Tim, look, we're not going to be the only ones having to defend Europe when it comes to that. The Americans are with us here, and the combined NATO forces are substantial, particularly with the backing of an American military that only puts a tiny fragment of its overall military capability into NATO. 100% of Germany's and most of Europeans' forces are committed to NATO. In the case of America, that's not the case. We in fact have a very clear conventional superiority vis-a-vis Russia, which is why Putin is threatening us with nuclear weapons.
You say that, but we failed in our core peacetime mission, which was to deter aggression primarily from Russia. And when it came to his third invasion,
failed. I'm sorry.
Well, he went into Ukraine. We failed to deter him from doing that. We failed to deter him from going into Georgia in 2008, Crimea 2014. This is the third time we failed to deter military adventurism on his part, isn't it?
Yes, but that was not a military failure. That was a political failure. That's the problem here. It's not that he doesn't respect our military capabilities. He thought we were politically too weak and too divided and too ignorant and too uncaring to ever react. And he is currently learning, to his great surprise, and I think very unpleasant shock, that things are entirely otherwise. And he's seeing the greatest rallying of the West diplomatic, political, and military forces that we have seen in our lifetimes. And this is only the beginning. It's only the beginning for Putin, but it's only the beginning for us. I believe this could be protracted, ugly, ghastly in many, many ways, but I don't think Putin ends up winning this one. I'm in fact quite confident of that.
A lot of the burden of what the West's sanctions strategy is about will be borne by business, won't it? Especially the big international brands. How long do you think they can be relied on to shun the very lucrative Russian markets that they've been enjoying for so long?
Tim, I believe that business has had a rude awakening in Russia and for at least a decade now. As we know, there was once the famous German Ostausschuss, the Eastern Committee of the German Federation of Industries, which was the greatest torchbearer for Putinism for a long, long time, very, very influential in German politics. And the truth is that both the center-left and Chancellor Merkel's, who was of the center-right, policy of engagement and of hoping to change Russia through economic integration has utterly failed. And what got burned in that process was German business. And so German business has become far more distrustful and ambivalent, shall we say, about engagement with Russia than it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. And the same thing is by now true of China. So I think that you will not see German business saying that the German government or NATO, the alliance, is making a mistake here. What you will see, there is one significant risk, if I might. There is now a debate, which I think is mainly because there's a public need to do something that is a strong gesture. The Ukrainians have been asking us to institute a no-fly zone. You and I haven't talked about that yet, but a no-fly zone would be a direct entry of NATO into combat because it would require bombarding of Russian air defenses on Russian territory. That's just not possible. And therefore, people are casting around for alternate options, and one obvious alternate option is cutting off all energy imports from Russia. The problem with that is
which Germany has said it won't do. Germany has come out and said it won't do.
There are, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news or analysis that you don't like, but there are prudent reasons for doing that. One, it is much less important than the sanctions we've already instituted, the central bank sanctions and the export controls. Those are far more effective in constraining and punishing the Kremlin. Energy cutoffs, arguably, the costs are much higher for us than they are for Russia. Yes, they send additional money to Russia, but that does not compensate for the losses it's making with the existing sanctions that have already been instituted. And the problem is that while you can tell people to wear sweaters and warm socks and forego heating, you cannot tell German industry or other European industry, for that matter, to just shut off their plants. That's not possible. That would be destructive in ways that I can't, begin to describe to you. So, and the problem is that those energy sources are not substitutable in the short term. We are all planning to substitute them in the medium term. The German government has promised to do it in 3 years, but for now, neither the Gulf states nor Venezuela are available as sources of substitute gas to fuel German industry and to keep those plants from shuttering.
All right. Constance Stelzen-Müller, a lot of thought seems to be going into devising something of what they call an exit ramp for Vladimir Putin, a way out which doesn't leave him even more resentful and aggressive than he is now. What might that exit ramp look like, do you think?
Honestly, that's a point on which I'm extremely pessimistic, because we've made so many offers that were, I think, very considered, very directed at exactly that, offering respect, offering continued, treatment of Russia as a great power, arms control, missile stationing, confidence building measures, troop stationing on Europe's eastern flank. All of that was up for discussion, and Putin has rejected all of it. We've attempted to have talks about ceasefire. Russian troops have continued shelling cities, Ukrainian cities, and Ukrainian civilians during these conversations about a ceasefire. At this point, it seems very clear that the only way that the Kremlin and Putin would be willing to engage in such conversations would be as a way of stalling and gaining time in order to be able to build up a greater troop presence and succeed in the military campaign that so far has been less than successful.
So what you're saying is that there's no kind of normal relationship that can ever be reestablished with Putin after this? He's lied to all the world leaders directly to their faces when they went to see him. So that's it.
I think that's understood by now. That is why there is no good scenario for the ending of this conflict that involves Putin in any way. And I hope that representations are being made to his inner circle, the Naryshkins, the Patrushevs, the other hard men, the Siloviki around him, that this man is not just not good for Russia, he's also not good for them. And if they wish to regain, or if they want a Russia that is taken seriously, that plays a role in international affairs, then Putin is in the process of destroying that. And frankly, the only ones who can change Putin's grip on power are these people. I believe nobody else can do it.
And the levels of repression that we're seeing in Russia at the moment, the prospect of long prison terms for anybody who speaks out against the war, the remains of the independent media being snuffed out, foreign broadcasts cut off. Is this, if Putin stays, or the people around him stay, is this the start of years of strict totalitarian rule in Russia? A giant
Presumably.
leap backwards?
Well, arguably, that's exactly what's been happening in the past decade, as Putin has kept tightening the screws on Russian civil society. Now, the difference between the Cold War and now is that in the Cold War, it was possible to disappear people into the gulags. And it was extremely difficult for people to flee. Now people have drones and social media, and operating gulags is a little more difficult. We know that the Chinese do it, but even there, we have a lot more information than the Chinese would like us to have. And Russians have been able to vote with their feet by leaving the country, and they have already been doing so over the last decade in vast numbers. And I think we must expect that much larger numbers of Russians will now also join the exodus and come to the West. And we should welcome them. We should say, come join with us, work with us. We will show you that we are decent societies. Send your sons and daughters to our universities. And when the time comes for you to be able to return, we hope that you will retain friendship and a good memory of us, because we want to be decent societies and we do not want to live at war with you. But my personal conviction, Tim, is that Europe is not going to be safe on its own continent unless there is a change of system in Russia. Now, I am not, just for there to be no misunderstanding here, The worst thing the West could attempt at this point is to talk about regime change or to attempt it. That change has to come from within Russia and on Russians' terms. But we have to understand that we remain at risk for as long as Putinism rules in Russia.
Constance Stelzenmüller, it's been great to have you on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Hope that was helpful.